Hi there, it's Aaliyah with eXp Realty, and I'm here to talk to you very briefly today on how to purchase a house with your spouse. Now, this isn't going to be all the details. This is just going to be a few tips that I could provide that will hopefully make the process go nice and smooth for you. I've bought my own house with my own spouse many times, but 18 years ago this February, it would have been my first time. Let's get to a few tips that will hopefully make the process go nice and smooth for you. Tip number 1 is going to sound very obvious, but it's less obvious than you would think. Communication. Communication is key. Now, before we get to the fun things about communication, like what neighborhood should we live in, what style house should we buy, let's back it up. And the very first thing that we need to talk to our spouses about is money. And a lot of times it's a little bit of a taboo subject, even if you're married or common law or engaged. These days, people do keep a lot of their finances separate. People have separate bank accounts. When I was growing up, my parents shared everything. My husband and I actually share bank accounts, but I know many people don't. So I think one of the very first realistic conversations that you should be having with your partner when you're thinking about buying a house is all about the money. So for example, if you've never had the deep, dark financial discussion with your spouse before, there's probably a few things to go over, but some of the biggest things you'll want to talk about would be anything that could potentially hurt your chances at securing a mortgage or a loan. Do you have your credit maxed out? Have you been late on payments? Have you ever had a credit card or something go to collections in the last few years? There's a lot of things to consider when you're applying for a mortgage for a property, and some of these things can come up that you might not even know about. So oftentimes it's good to check your own credit or to have an idea about where your credit sits. I actually use an app called Credit Karma, and it tracks my credit. So there's some things to discuss historically in your finances with your spouse, probably before you go ahead and apply for that loan, just so there's no little surprises that come up. Tip number 2 is actually going to be about being on the same page. And I know you're thinking, well, I'm buying a house with my spouse, like of course we're on the same page. But there's a few little things that you might not have talked about. So for example, is your partner or are you thinking this is going to be a 3 to 5 year place? Let's buy a townhouse, let's upgrade in 5 years. Is your spouse more of the mentality, this is going to be our 10-year home? This is where we're potentially going to bring our children to, or have a lot of pets? Or is this something that your spouse is thinking that they're going to be living at for the next 25 years until they retire? That is kind of a lost art. I know all of our parents stayed in the same house for years, and our generation doesn't do that as much, but those are things to consider. Are you on the same page for your future? And not just for the next year or 2 years, for the next 10 years. Purchasing a home is a huge financial investment, and you want to make sure that you are on the same page. Tip number 3 is a little bit more fun. It's about being on the same page, but a little more aesthetically. Have you nailed down what location you want to live in? Is something close to work for you, close to him? If not, do you have a middle ground location? Style of home? Do you want a home with lots of stairs? Do you want a home on a green space? Do you want a open concept home? Do you want a bungalow, a closed concept? There's a lot of fun things to consider when thinking about what kind of home that you want, and those are a lot of the conversations that couples are having early on in their journey. But what I would challenge you to talk about as well is deal breakers. So for example, it would be a deal breaker for me to not have a huge kitchen. That is very important to me, and every house that we've had has had a pretty good kitchen. That would be a deal breaker to my husband to not have an amazing garage. Now, what if we each found the perfect house? This one had an amazing kitchen, but less of a garage. And this one had an amazing garage, but less of a kitchen. Who is gonna win that battle? Or does nobody win and we keep looking for houses? I actually gave a checklist to a lot of my buyers if I'm meeting them for the first time and I don't know them very well. And it asks a lot of questions about needs, about wants, about deal breakers, and about where they're willing to have some concession. So there you have it. In conclusion, buying a home as a couple is very exciting. It's a very rewarding and fun memory-making experience. And if you consider all of these things beforehand, it's going to make the actual adventure of buying a home a ton of fun. I promise you.